Okay, here we go. Welcome, everyone. This is the May Blue Dragon National Forum, and glad to see we're represented. At least from what I can tell, we have Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, Brookhaven, Bechtel, and the Brookhaven side office. And if there's any others, please let us know. You can put it right next to your name on the participant list. But no, I'm excited to bring this to you. I just presented this a couple hours ago to the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. It's something that we talked about. It's critically important. And I hope if others didn't get a chance to be here in person, that you'll share this link when it comes out, because I think this is a very impactful presentation, and it talks to the state of our country's infrastructure and the threats to our infrastructure, and what are we doing to evaluate the effectiveness of our defenses. And of course, that's what Blue Dragon, what we specialize in, right, is in conducting assessments, evaluations of certain standards and performance against those standards. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, dive into the presentation here. All right, so what we're talking about today is how to approach looking at something so just massive as our nation's critical infrastructure from a systems approach, a holistic approach. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And as we get going, I wanted to start making these more immersive. And so you have about 30 seconds to type in a word or two, anything you like. And we've got some answers here. Robbie said where we're at with respect to infrastructure, what others are interested in, and a systems approach. Very nice. So that was like the icebreaker, and hopefully there'll be more participation because we have some questions coming right up. So let's talk about the nation's infrastructure. The nation's infrastructure is divided into 16 systems, 16 sectors. And here they are. And notice that we all work in the energy sector. Each one of these sectors has its own set of challenges, its own set of subsystems. So if we start to look at things in a systems way, which is what this topic is all about, we need to explore it as a system and figure out what the subsystems are, what the threats are, and what the defenses are against those threats, right? So there may be an aerospace person or two that joins us simply because we have those kind of clients, but most of us work in energy. So why don't we start there and going, okay, what are some of the key energy infrastructure subsystems? If you haven't thought about this, this is a good exercise, because these subsystems are what work together to create some kind of a comprehensive infrastructure supporting the secure storage of the kind of things that we have here in the Department of Energy, including nuclear weapons, nuclear waste, special nuclear materials, sensitive things, the things that we want to protect. And if you haven't thought about it before, here is a good list: physical security, cybersecurity, environmental controls, power systems, backup systems, inventory management, personnel management, emergency response, maintenance, testing, transportation, logistics, governance, and compliance. So that is a heck of a list. I'll give it some more granularity when we get to a whiteboard, because I have a present for you. I've put how we're going to do this on a whiteboard, and I'll give you access to it so you can look around and maybe even use it in the future. So let's go back to our quiz here, our AHA slides. Do you happen to know at your sites what infrastructure is within your staff's purview? This is quite interesting. Have you ever thought about this? Now, I just gave you a list. This list is quite comprehensive: physical, cyber, environmental, power supplies, inventory, personnel. And we haven't talked about it in detail, but this gives you a great sense of what's going on. So give it a shot. What do you think is under your purview? Some of you are in oversight capacities or are doing certain types of assessment activities. And there you go: transportation, physical, personnel. This is interesting. Compliance, transportation, governance. Good. I'm glad to see a lot of these things. Cybersecurity. So someone's in cyber, or it is within their purview. So if you haven't thought about the fact that you're actually in the position to evaluate the effectiveness of the defenses that protect our nation's critical infrastructure. Here's the next question. What role does your team actually have in protecting your sectors? Talked about the energy sectors, critical infrastructure. So what specific roles do you play? And here we go. So let me hide this image and see what we got. Very nice. So oversight, yes. Risk identification and mitigation, testing and evaluation, and yes, oversight. So those three: oversight, testing, evaluation, and risk identification, which is hugely important because I'm asking, where are the threat assessments? Without the threat assessments, right, we can't tell whether we have the right defenses in place. Think about it. So who's got the threat assessments at your site? And are you looking at them? Do we have an activity that actually goes and looks at the threat assessments and makes a correlation between that and the line of defenses? So things to think about. Back in 2013, the Department of Homeland Security generated this National Infrastructure Protection Plan. And think about it. The 2013 DHS plan was put together based on information from the previous decade. So think about how old this information is, 10 to 20 years old, right? And then came the development of sector-specific plans. So we have the Department of Energy leading a specific energy sector-specific plan, and it came out in 2015. Again, it was under development for 2 years, and it's based on information from the previous 10. So when you look at the references to this beast, and here it is, the energy specific protection plan, when you look at a lot of these references, they are old. All right. The link is going on the chat. So if you would like to get your own copy of this energy specific plan, it is quite interesting. I was fascinated to see everything that's going on, especially chapter 4, the risk management portion of this. Okay. But so they established all of these rules and governing bodies. And so you can read there the CPAC, the subsector coordinating councils, the government coordinating council. And this plan is supposed to bring it all together. It's supposed to help guide and integrate this sector's efforts to improve the security and resilience of critical infrastructure. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Now, here's the picture straight out of their book. This is what they show the critical infrastructure partners for the energy sector. There's electricity, oil and gas, and then the government council, which includes state, local, tribal, territorial government councils. So imagine the nightmare of coordinating between all these agencies, right? And they have all kinds of different portions of our national infrastructure within their purview. The vision for the energy SSP is to, you got it, protect physical and cyber infrastructure, right? Reduce vulnerabilities, minimize consequences, identify threats, disrupt the threats. And how do we do that? Defenses. So I want to start putting actionable terms into all of this red tape. And that's the next section. How we turn this into an actionable strategy for evaluating our nation's infrastructure and the effectiveness of the defenses. And here's their goals. And right up front, we talk about assess and analyze threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences to critical infrastructure to inform risk management activities. And what are those risk management activities? Well, I brought the Bowtie risk management model with me. And I'd like to show you specifically what activities everyone should be doing. So that's how I've broken it down here to make sense of it all and give us something tangible, actionable, and not simply all these words on paper. The plan shows us the main threats and risks to the electricity subsector, and I highlighted cyber threats, physical threats, aging infrastructure, equipment failure, and aging workforce on this one, and then oil and gas holds almost the identical threats: cybersecurity, aging infrastructure, aging workforce. So where are these threat assessments? And where's the correlation to our line of defenses? I don't know. We need to look for it. So the question is, how does each one of your sites factor into the energy sector specific plan? Do you know that you have a footprint here? Or have you never heard of it? Are any of your organizations, and believe me, if you're in the weapons complex or you're stirring uranium or special nuclear materials or waste, you are in the critical infrastructure for the energy sector. Do we agree? And so, yes, what is your footprint in this particular energy sector specific plan? And if your teams and your management and your senior management has never even seen this or has a flow down out of this, then I think we found a gap. We might have found a hole in our oversight. So this is why I'm here encouraging you to take a look and see if there's a hole in the overall oversight plan of your organizations, because infrastructure is a big deal, and it's actually going to be under attack more than ever. We have a rising threat. We'll talk about that. So we may not be experts in infrastructure and threat assessments and all that, but we can be experts in oversight and assessments and performance assessments. And we'll know how to put it together on the Blue Dragon chart is where I'm going. So now, holistic assessments, this systems theory. And I have a brief section here to encourage us to take a look at our infrastructure as a system. The set of interrelated components and elements that work together as a whole to achieve a common purpose or goal. And that means protect our critical infrastructure, right? As I've said in class, it is the product of the interactions of these subsystems that make it work the way it does. And if it doesn't work, well, you get what you deserve. That's what Deming says. You get what you deserve. So if we don't have a viable protection scheme, well, that's the way the system is built. That's the way the processes, procedures, programs, oversight, everything was put together, and it has holes. All right. So systems inventory is a key. We'll talk in more detail about that. So I've talked about, all right, identify your system and then do a systems inventory. The Blue Dragon chart accommodates that. And I use this example. I won't cover it again because you guys have seen it. If I take the best parts of each of these supercars and assemble a fifth new supercar, will it even work? As we've said before, no, it will not work, right, Bill? They're not designed to work together. This engine and that drivetrain and that transmission and those systems were not designed to work together. They're designed to work in their individual systems. So we have to take a look at each system. So the Sandia system and infrastructure is not the same as the Los Alamos, is not going to be the same as Livermore, et cetera, Brookhaven, right? So we have to understand that it's not a one size fit all, because as my next example will show, the exact same system and subsystems can have dramatically different results. And I use college football because I love it. And again, I won't belabor the point, but here we have all the subsystems in place that make up a national championship college football team, right? You can read it for yourself. There's a nice list of everything that goes into it, all the way down to the fans, the community, the boosters, the on-campus stadiums, the location, the funding, everything. So what's the difference between that system, and I put this question to you, and the team that comes in last place, the 135th place team in college football? What do you think the differences are on the subsystems? Well, they have the identical subsystems. Completely different outcome. Okay? Because there's so many variables, and it is the product of the interactions. They have head coaches, but they may not share the same philosophy. They have playbooks. They may not be the same playbook. They have facilities, and they have recruiting, right? But there's so many variables that you get different outcomes. So the product of the interactions of team one is very different than the outcomes of the interactions of team two, right? So we must take a very careful look at the subsystems and how they're working together, because somewhere in this set of subsystems is where you see the differences. And brilliant coaches like Nick Saban, have been able to figure out what's going to make each of the subsystems work to its maximum capability and create a national football team. All right, so to understand how systems perform, we have to understand and evaluate the subsystems that were designed to work together to give us the desired outcome. That's why the Blue Dragon chart is built the way it is, so we can take a holistic systems-based approach to a problem, because that's what it takes to truly solve a problem. And I don't know how many other systems do take that kind of approach. Now I'd like to give you a power pack section on the bow tie. You haven't seen this. This is my latest and greatest. So in order to create a game plan for assessing something like the energy sector's critical infrastructure with dynamic changing threat profiles, it is a massive problem. Don't you agree? But it is not just a problem. I think it's a wicked problem. And the more I looked into it, the more I understood what goes into our critical energy infrastructure, the more I think it's an even bigger wicked problem. It's not just like one elephant charging at us. It's a whole herd of elephants charging at us. There's a lot of threats converging all at the same time on a number of our infrastructures, and it is a nasty problem. So are we getting ahead of it? Are we keeping up with the dynamic threat profiles? Has the ESSP for energy been updated since 2015? Have the threat profiles been updated since 2015? Right? Okay, more on that. So now let's talk about my version of the bow tie, because the bow tie is too simple. So this is the way I went. We have our system, and why don't we break it down into the applicable subsystems, and why don't we do a threat analysis to this system? All right, what are the threats that attack these subsystems? Now, to correlate with that, what are the line of defenses to prevent those threats from hurting us? Because threats that bypass us cause events of different levels of complexity, right? Minor, moderate, significant, catastrophic. And then on this side, if we do have events, we go into mitigation, event response, right? And then to prevent these events from happening again, we have to have root cause analysis, a graded approach based on significance. But I'll say this: if we can't tolerate a repeat event, it better be a root cause. And your final performance of whatever you're looking at is dependent on all these things: how well you did your threat assessment, how well you did your lines of defense, and if you did have events, the event response and the event prevention. So taking a quick look now, I'm getting into what are the activities that we can plan based on this risk assessment model so that we know what to do. We can turn these into oversight strategies. So systems inventory. Has the organization actually identified the subsystems for the affected infrastructure, or the one we're looking at? Have they done a proper threat analysis? Where is it? Where is it documented? Does it cover the kind of threats that you are aware of, or that your subject matter experts are aware of? And how about the line of defenses? Is there a correlation between the threat analysis and the line of defenses, and how we got everything covered, right? So what should we focus on an ongoing basis? The high risk evolutions, activities, and emerging threats, and not standard checklists. Get away from standard checklists and make sure you're moving towards these high risk activities and emerging threats. Things like ISO 9001 and that audit program aren't going to help you, because they don't even talk about cybersecurity because they're so outdated. So industry standards, regulations are not keeping up with the dynamic threats. Also, proactive performance-based assessments of the line of defenses. Do we have the proper line of defenses based on a threat analysis, right? How well designed are they? Are they effective? Now, when we have events, we can look at how and why the defenses failed, and the effectiveness of emergency response. How are we doing on that end? So we should be evaluating proactively whether there is adequate training and analysis identifying and escalating negative trends. Why wait for a big event? Let's act on negative trends of lower level events. So that has to work well. And the effectiveness of corrective actions for the recurring events that we're seeing. If we're having recurring events, we're not really doing effective corrective actions, probably administrivia. In terms of the backside, when we do have an event, do we have effective response procedures? Do we have effective root cause analysis process, a graded approach? And again, if we can't tolerate a repeat event, it better be a root cause. And then actions to prevent recurrence. Do we have the right strategies for actions to prevent recurrence? Are we doing extent of the root cause determinations? Yes. Are we using the hierarchy of hazard controls? Are we doing lead mistake proofing? Or are we just adding more procedures and more training? So what can we do here? We can do event classification checks. Are we actually categorizing our events so that we're not dumbing it down to a level Charlie or Bravo where we don't require a root cause, if in fact we cannot tolerate these kinds of things from happening again? And the effectiveness of our internal and external performance monitoring, right? So if our performance continues to be bad, there's also something wrong in performance monitoring. Okay, so what I'd like to emphasize is that this is a really valuable model. It can help us prepare the proactive risk-based strategies that we need to continuously evaluate and improve our critical infrastructure within our purview from the standpoint of threats, defenses, right? Subsystems, threats, and defenses. And you can continuously assess the effectiveness of our defenses. Okay. And now to get into the final section, how do we turn all this into a Blue Dragon chart? And that's where we're going to end up here. And this is the question for us. Question 4, last one. What are your thoughts about this? You read the news or you hear the news, you watch TV. How has the threat profile changed in just the past 3 years? And are the critical infrastructure partners, all those government agencies and entities and all the red tape and all the coordination that has to happen for this to work, do you think they're keeping up with the changing threat profile? How effective do you think these agencies are? How responsive are they? How proactive are they? And now, as someone just put on here, we've got threats that are AI enhanced. How about the worst possible case scenario? The worst case scenario in my mind is that China develops quantum computing before we do, and before we have a chance to identify how to defend against quantum computing. Take AI and make it exponentially better. Complexity increases, cyber is a factor, and global conflict is affecting our supply chains and economies. Yes, all of that has gone into it. So there is a complex, dynamic set of factors all working against us and all threatening our nation's critical infrastructure. Do we even know about it? Are you even discussing it? Is your site discussing it? We have a Brookhaven site office person here in the room from an oversight standpoint, a government oversight standpoint. Is the government talking about it? Is the NNSA talking about oversight of our critical infrastructure and our threats? And now, what do we do from a Blue Dragon standpoint? The basics. Define the system we'd like to look at, right? Within energy, what is this system, the infrastructure piece, because there's so many pieces that we'd like to look at, and then conduct a systems inventory on that. Define the threats. Where is the threat analysis? Someone should have already done it. They're telling us that they already did it. What is the line of defenses based on that threat analysis? What is the effectiveness of those defenses? How has performance been constantly evaluated, assessed? What is our plan? Are we doing self-assessments? Are we doing audits? What are we doing? Are we finding gaps in performance? And are we band-aiding the gaps, or are we going deep into root cause analysis with lines of inquiry to get to the bottom of it, so we can actually close those gaps by working with the issue owners, creating a solid plan that's not based on administrivia? So all of these things need to be done. And of course, we have a way to do it with our model. And I would like to give you access to this chart here. So give me a second while I go grab it for you. So that slide I just talked about, that's this here. So that's what I put on there. Okay. And now, if we're looking at a critical infrastructure threat assessment, how might this go? Well, let's start by, again, defining the system. What are we looking at? We're looking at the state of readiness of the Pantex XYZ infrastructure. Okay. And the site's defenses in place to protect that critical infrastructure. Okay. What are the specific threats that we need to assess? I don't know. Is it just cyber? Is it physical? What kind of threats are we expecting? Let's make sure we go grab the document that has a threat assessment for that piece of infrastructure. Okay. And now the subsystems analysis, and I've thrown on here a straw man. So I had listed each of these as a broad topic. Now we get into some granularity here. So physical security, perimeter fences, barriers, asset controls, intrusion detection systems, right? All the things that go into physical security. There's plans for that. There's security audits. There's all kinds of activities testing our physical security systems. What about cybersecurity? This one I'm more worried about because, like I said, ISO 9001 does not even mention cybersecurity. So do we even have audit programs in place, oversight programs in place to look at cybersecurity systems like firewalls, intrusion detection, data encryption? I'm sure the IT department is doing it, but who's looking over their shoulder? We have done some Blue Dragons at some sites on cybersecurity, and they have failed badly. I'll leave it at that. Environmental control systems, right? Fire suppression, radiation monitoring, big ticket items, power and backup system, redundant power supplies, uninterruptible power supplies, backup batteries, gasoline for our emergency diesel generators, right? Inventory management, and so on. Personal management is a big one. Security clearance, access controls, training and certification, emergency response, right? Maintenance, testing, transportation, and governance, including policies, procedures, and regulations. So there's an awful lot. And I got to tell you, things like industry standards and regulations, they're not the end all. They have holes. And how long does it take to upgrade an industry standard or a procedure? Or a regulation, like an NRC regulation? Takes a while, doesn't it? All right. So we're starting to get together what we need to take a hard look at this. We can identify our stakeholders, our materials, like guards, gates, guns, whatever it is. Just like always, we can put our documents up here and we can look at a whole lot of things, right? We can draw an organization chart as to how all these players work together. We can look at the relationships, look at the communication pathways, and see if we actually have a coordinated approach to protecting our infrastructure, or it's a red tape nightmare, as you might expect. Plus all of the KPIs, process maps, analysis that you could want. So we know how to capture all that. We know how to capture performance in phase one of a Blue Dragon. And in terms of performance, all right, we know to go get direct observations, logs, reports, records, witness statements, wherever we can get evidence on the cybersecurity or the physical security or whatever it is that we want performance evidence on. We know to go get it and bring it here. And we know what the line of defenses has to be for our respective threats. So, okay, what are the documents, the working groups, the threat assessment documents, the procedures, the oversight, self-assessments, physical defenses, et cetera, et cetera. We know to get it. We know how to bring it in here and organize it. So we can get very organized very rapidly and really go to town. And of course, what are we doing? We're comparing performance against requirements. We're looking for the deltas because, as we've learned, we need to think like doctors. We're looking for symptoms, the high blood pressure, the high temperature. We're looking for things going wrong, the deviations, the non-compliance, so that we can create a question and then dive in. We create our questions, and of course, you know what these tan boxes are. Those represent the lines of inquiry questions. So we bring all of our lines of inquiry questions from wherever on phase one over into phase 2 so we can start our causal analysis, focus groups with subject matter experts. Then we take those results and we bring it out over to phase 3. And now we apply the hierarchy of hazard controls, lean mistake proofing, extent of the root cause determinations, and get rid of stupid stuff, the latest and greatest. And we can help the issue owners create a really good action plan that covers all the bases and has a much stronger likelihood of preventing recurrence. How do we assess critical infrastructure? Well, it's a gigantic herd of elephants charging at us, which is a very dynamic situation with a lot of moving parts, with a lot of scary things going on. But we have a way of organizing ourselves, picking it apart, and like you say, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Well, we can pick apart our infrastructure and address it and assess it one piece at a time. And we have a way to do it right here.
Hey, Rob, this is Steve from Lawrence Livermore. Do you mind going over the bottom part again where you talked about, the transition down to right before we gave the customers like their, down to the bottom part of the chart with the yellows to the aqua green boxes and so forth?
Yes,
Just because
absolutely.
it's my first experience with it, so I just want to make sure I caught that correctly. So sorry about that, Rob.
No, please, I'm happy to help. So up here we have our questions, our line of inquiry questions, which came from the output of phase 1. These are almost all of them symptoms, deviations, like something went wrong. So we ask what went wrong, and we start going down our cause and effect sequences. And you notice we start to see the common causes. And instead of drawing lines, we use colors because you see what happens when you draw lines is a disaster. Anyway, once we identify our contributing factors and our root causes, we assign issue owners. And with the issue owners, we go over and create the chart down here on phase 3. Phase 3 is the corrective action plan phase. Actions to prevent recurrence. And our guidance is that we train the issue owners on staying away from admin and PPE. This is administrivia. This raises awareness, perhaps. It's not effective in preventing recurrence. We want to focus on the upper tier of the hierarchy, which is much more effective. And we married up with lean mistake proofing, which marries up very nicely with those top 4 tiers. Make it impossible for us to have another problem. So that's that. Extent of the cost. So for each issue, we will have a corrective action, 1 for 1, or of course more than one corrective action for each root cause or significant contributor. But beyond the immediate corrective actions for the specific issues, we go deeper and look for the extent of the damage caused by the root causes. This is the extent of cause determination, not extent of condition. And extent of the causes is very significant because if you don't do this, you just left yourself wide open for the same problem in other areas, the same effect. And we're looking for 3 things. The effects on human, right? Other accidents and incidents to humans, the effects on equipment operability concerns, and the effects on programs and procedures. Other programs and processes could be affected. So that's what we need to evaluate during the extent of the root causes. Then other actions to address other issues identified in our efforts, and the get rid of stupid stuff, which is avoid piling on layers upon layers of administrivia. Try to make it more efficient. Try to create actions, for example, like why don't we redraw this map, this process, and get rid of all the redundancies instead of just adding more redundancy, more checkpoints, more procedure requirements. And that's how procedures go from being 1/8 of an inch thick to a 1/2 inch thick in a matter of a decade. And so Bain, one of the big 4, came up with get rid of stupid stuff. I found this in Harvard Business Review. I added it to our training. And so not many of you have seen this training, but you can look it up. It's being used extensively in healthcare right now. I like it. It answers the question of how do we prevent just from piling on procedures and training after every single incident. Does that help, Steve?
Thank you, Rob. That was very clear. And yeah, the first time around, that was a little fast for me, but you did an excellent job slowing it down. I took in everything you said. Thank you, Rob.
Good. And this is recorded, so you can actually access our recording here when it comes out next week.
I appreciate it, Rob. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Very good. So to wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with a copy of this chart, which you have access to, and you have a sense for how efficient we can be. But what a challenge this is. Securing our nation's infrastructure is a major challenge. And I propose that we use a holistic systems-based approach with modern tools. And in this case, I presented to the Defense Board a couple hours ago, but in this case, your teams can efficiently guide the systematic assessment of the state of readiness of the defenses of our energy's critical infrastructure and their subsystems. So whether you're in oversight, or you're the site office, or the NNSA, or QA, doesn't matter. We need to have our eyes open to this particular area because I think we're going to suffer. I think our infrastructure is going to suffer from a multi-pronged attack anytime in the next 5 years. I'm sure everyone is thinking that. Final thoughts: to assess critical infrastructure, we need to use a holistic systems-based approach for maximum efficiency and effectiveness. We need to understand and evaluate the individual systems within the critical infrastructure, and then do a subsystems inventory to understand we flush out exactly what makes it tick. We need to assess and analyze specific threats to the critical infrastructure and conduct an analysis of defenses that are meant to prevent those threats. So we need to understand exactly what the threats are, what the defenses are for those threats, so we can continue to close the gaps, strengthen our line of defenses, and we'll do that by identifying the root causes. So if we can't afford a repeat event, we must do a root cause. Keep saying that to yourselves. Keep telling that to your management, because this is where we fall short. And then actions to prevent recurrence. Solid set of actions to prevent recurrence is important. Not just more training, more procedures doesn't cut it. And then by using the bow tie risk assessment model, I've tried to show you how we can do some proactive activities that'll help us respond to our changing threat profiles, our rapidly changing threat profiles, and get us ahead of it and start closing gaps that people didn't even know were there. I don't think folks understand at these sites with these critical infrastructures how rapidly the threats are changing, and that our documentation and our mode of operation and our oversight are getting left behind. They're not keeping up. So this is why I said I thought this is one of those very impactful uses of Blue Dragon, and I hope I've given you lots of food for thought. So at this point, let's open it up for questions.
Will the bow tie model be available on the downloads page in the library?
Yes, I haven't even put it up in the library yet, but how about if I send out, I'll put the bow tie model, and those slides will be available to you, the PDF.
Great, thank you.
But I think I'll put the bow tie model PDF slides, those few, in its own file to go along with this presentation. If you want it, I'll send it to you, Brad.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Learn to use it. Learn to use it. And I think this is, of course, a little better and more granular than your typical bow tie model, because it really, I use the systems, right, language in it, and it really helps you see and compartmentalize what exactly has to be done at each of the 3 phases.
Rob, Steve Mark from Lawrence Livermore.
Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say this was an excellent presentation, and I appreciate being part of it. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Steve. Thanks for being here. Hey, Robbie.
Yeah, no, I thought it was an excellent presentation to you, and it really sort of raises, the concerns I think that are in the back of, probably many people's heads, but you sort of laid it out there with all the different subsystems that, just from, everyday perspective, people aren't aware of, but there are systems that are potentially at risk, and it was just interesting but concerning. So,
any other questions or comments? And of course, Bill, I'm going to put you on the spot later for your comments. I know you you're a deep thinker, and Bill always has some good reflection on what we're talking about here. What do you think, Charlie?
I thought it was a great presentation, and I also would like a copy of the bow tie assessment model. And yeah, I hope everyone is thinking about this and we can start applying it within our individual institutions.
I would hope that when the PDF becomes available on our website along with this video, that you download the PDF and you start showing it around, get people thinking. All right, Bill, over to you.
Well, I was just reflecting on one aspect. I'm a worst case thinker. It's part of my personality type, and have a vivid imagination, and so I don't sleep very well, and I kind of suffer with that. But you need people like me on the team, because I think we really suffer from a lack of imagination in our complex systems analysis. We say, I couldn't imagine that happening here, or we really didn't see that coming. And so somebody like me, I said, well, why wouldn't you imagine that? These are the things that run through my head and keep me up at night. Not everybody needs to be like me, because it's not very fun to not sleep, but we do need to have more imagination in terms of what could possibly go wrong. Now, I'm quickly reminded that we can't run down everything we can imagine, because we simply don't have the resources for it. But I think we err on the side of not imagining enough in terms of looking at our complex systems. In the thing that you showed, Rob, the other thing that came to mind was a whole bunch of subsystems, and their interactions are not just overlays. They're not like single points of connection, and we could govern that by an MOU or something. They're really complex, these interactions, and they have a lot of dynamics to them, like hierarchical relationships or other kinds of things. It's more like a three-dimensional key that fits together. So the analysis goes into the systems themselves. Imagination's necessary, but also in those critical relationships and connecting points and how complex they are. So this is a really, really rich field for people that want to make a profession out of this. And I think it's really good work. It has the potential to save incredible amounts of resource, and then lives, of course, to mitigate disasters. But we really need to the deep looks into these complex systems, and we need imaginative people to come up with these crazy things like a 9/11 attack. That who would have ever imagined that happened, or any number of things that happen that we see in hindsight, but we couldn't imagine them thinking forward. So that's what's kind of,
and we really have to
keep me up at night.
And it's even worse now. You really have to think about, out of 11 million people who are illegally in this country, what percentage came in who want to do harm, that are from enemy countries, and what they're gearing up to do in the next 5 years. We really have to think about that, and be prepared. We really have to start preparing now if we haven't already started. And so everything that I read in these plans from back in 2013 and before, if you look at them, they're pretty dated. If you look at the kind of threats they're looking at, natural disasters, think Fukushima Daiichi and things like that. Okay, but the threat picture is evolving dramatically. And I don't think our programs, processes, defenses are evolving as fast. And so I think it's up to us, the oversight organizations, and a holistic approach, a systems approach, because as you said, Bill, these are interrelated. One is not independent of the other. It is the product of these subsystems: physical, cyber, environmental, power, inventory, personnel. It is the product of these subsystems that will work together to protect the piece of infrastructure. And you don't have any other way of looking at it any better than with a integrated systems-based approach like the Blue Dragon chart. So I think this is putting our best foot forward. Thank you for that, Bill. Very well said. Appreciate it. And I think you're going to have to take some nighttime sleep medicine or something if you ever want to get some good rest.
So one real quick thing, I put in you mentioned some stuff that actually showed up in that Russ Akoff. Russ Akoff was a management theorist that died, many years ago, but he's funny. And the video that I put up there talks specifically about that car analogy that Rob brought up. And it's a really entertaining video to listen to one of the great minds in this this kind of discipline And if anybody hasn't seen it, you should watch it. It's fun.
Very good. And I have some requests on the chat. If any of you have other requests, please put it on the chat so we don't forget you. Otherwise, it's the top of the hour. It's been a great hour. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. I know it was light attendance, but I hope you go back and tell your folks to watch the video, download the PowerPoint, and spread the word. Okay?
Thank you,
Very good.
Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Have a great one. Have a great rest of the week.